All right. Hello, internet land. I'm going to let people join here for a minute, do a quick welcome from One More Page Books. We're so thrilled that we're getting to do this. We're not doing a whole lot of events over the summer, so I'm excited about the ones that we do have in July. I can't believe it's July already. So I want to welcome everyone to our virtual One More Page for this event this evening, which we're very excited because it is the day that your book comes out, J'nell. It's so exciting. I'm going to do a quick, just walk people through. If you haven't joined one of our events on One More Page, we are both on Facebook and YouTube. So wherever you're joining us, thanks for joining us. We do have some people who do watch on Eventbrite as well. And I always want to remind people, if you are there, if you want to comment or ask a question, you need to pop over to YouTube or Facebook. So that's where you can interact. If you are viewing on YouTube and you want to ask a question, please do that in the live chat box. And on Facebook, just in Facebook comments. We will see your comments and your questions during the hour. So those are my main points I want to touch on here. And then I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to introduce our authors tonight. And then I'm going to pop out and let them have the conversation. I'm going to sit back here in the back and enjoy. Kind of like I would at the store, actually. So let me introduce our authors. As you're going to hear tonight, J'nell Ciesielski. Is that right?
Yes.
Weaves fresh takes into romances of times gone by. When not creating dashing heroes and daring heroines, she can be found dreaming of Scotland, indulging in chocolate of any kind, or watching old black and white movies. J'nell is a Florida native, but she now lives here in Virginia with her husband, daughter, and lazy beagle. And if you have been around One More Page online or in person in recent years, you probably know author Greer Macallister. She writes wonderful historical fiction inspired by courageous women, including her latest work, The Arctic Fury. And Greer lives with her family just across the river here in Washington, D.C. Greer is kind enough to join us for this event tonight and another one next week. So I'll mention that again at the end as well. But welcome both of you, and J'nell, congratulations. It's always exciting to have an author on the event, the night of the publication. So I'm going to turn things over to you guys.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Amber, and thank you, One More Page. And again, congratulations, J'nell.
So thank you. It's always exciting on release day.
Yes, and I think sometimes launch days can be kind of anticlimactic, and that they were that way even before the pandemic, but especially in the pandemic, we're all sort of, you're in your house and like, okay, my book's out. But then you can spend the day on Instagram and Facebook and, do things like that.
I mean, I did laundry and I vacuumed. That's what I did. So you're right. It is very anticlimactic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you expect like balloons to fall from the sky or something, but no, it doesn't.
It would be nice.
That's okay. Yeah, but you still know that your book is finally out there, so that's all you need.
Yes, out in the world. So tonight we were talking about the ICE SWAN, which is just beautiful, beautiful. And it's funny because this is actually the second event that you and I have done like this year. This is your second book that's come out. And I know on the other book, people were always asking if you were the person on the cover. So if you had has anyone asked if it's you on the cover again this time?
No, they haven't for this one, but you're right. For Beauty Among Ruins, they were always asking, is that you? No, it's not me, but this one is not me either. So luckily they get professionals to take these pictures and I can stay behind the scenes, which is where I prefer to be.
And you do the hard work in the middle.
Exactly.
Let other people do this part and we do this part.
Exactly. Much more talented people can put together these amazing covers that we have. And I am so grateful because I do not have that skill.
Right. Yeah. The visual stuff, some people can do both the visual and the writing. I, like you, am more comfortable doing the writing part and then letting somebody else run with the front of it.
Exactly. Yes.
How was the cover process on this one? Was it fairly straightforward, or did you have a lot of going back and forth?
For this one, I think they showed me 3 or 4 different covers, and they were all gorgeous. And they had ballerinas and stuff on them. And in the story, Princess Svetlana does ballet. So she is a ballerina. But I told them that the story is not about ballet so much. It's a part of it, but it's not the story. So I didn't feel it deserved to be on the cover. So they came up with this other one. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh, like you can't get any better than this cover. So that's the one that we went with. It was pretty easy. We tried the font and silver and something else, but this bronze, I think, really sets off all those icy blues. And I think it's a perfect complement to the story. And I love it.
It is. It's just gorgeous. And what you need from a title and a cover is to, first of all, to catch the eye of the reader, and then to convey what's in the book. And I did a little test at home. I asked my 6-year-old what this book was about or where this book was set, and she immediately said Paris. So I was very glad that even a 6-year-old can get that sense from this.
That's what you want, because I mean, I'll admit it. I'm one of those people who buys books based on the cover. That's not to say that books with less than great covers aren't good, because it's all about the story at the end of the day, but it's when those covers like really pop out at you, that's what makes you grab them. So I'm always really excited when mine come out so well. It's like the cherry on top of the cake. So it's perfect.
Yes. And there are so many books out there. You want to have something that just gets that bit of reader attention off the top.
Exactly. I mean, there are so many books. Like I lost count of how many books were released just today. So you have all this competition. And so you always want your product to stand out. And I think this one does. So
yes,
really happy.
So let's talk a little bit about the ICE SWAN, because we didn't do a little summary of it at the top of the hour. So give us the little elevator pitch or the little, teaser to say, reader, what is this book about?
So it starts off with the Russian Revolution, and it's about a princess who has to flee from the Bolsheviks who are taking power in Russia. And she flees with her family to Paris, which is right in the middle of the Great War at the time. And she meets a surgeon who proposes a marriage of convenience because she gets in a little bit of trouble with some underground dealings. And love takes a bit of time, but hopefully by the end they find their happily ever after.
Awesome. And it is historical romance. So you've got the happily ever after is a requirement, and we can all use those these days.
Yes, that's what I always say. I will always have a happy ending in my stories, because I think the world is just too full of bad stuff and sadness that we all need more happiness. So that's how I want my books to always end, is on a happy note.
Good. And like we've talked about, there are so many books out there in the world, even that just came out today or just came out this year. If you want to find a book that has an ambiguous ending or a chance of going deeply south, you can find that. But if you want a happy ending set in an exotic location with really interesting people and sort of illustrating the past, historical romance, I feel like is it's illustrating the past, but it's also illustrating the present. I feel like the historical stuff that we write always has something to do with now, as well as then. Yeah,
that's an interesting point, because even though these people lived 100, 200 years ago, they still have the same insecurities and fears and hopes and dreams that we have. And I think that's why historical readers, why we read these stories, is because, yes, they wear different clothes, but they still think the way that I think, and it's relatable, so we can understand them, and that helps us to connect with these characters and to care about what they're doing, and to care that they get the ending that they want. And that's one thing I love about historicals, but also the history that we can learn while we're reading them, whether it's an event that we all know about or just a little slice of history that we didn't know about, and we can learn new things. And that's what I love about this stuff.
Yes. And one of the things I loved in particular about this was you have Paris as a setting, right? Paris has all of these connotations of romance and beauty and classical architecture and just being this sort of eternal symbol.
City of love.
Sorry, go ahead.
City of Love.
Yes, City of Love. But in this case, it's that, but it's also, I mean, you're in the seedy underbelly, you're with all of these people who are running away, who are refugees. Can you talk a little bit about how you dove into that part of Paris in order to set the story there?
It was a really interesting twist on Paris, because you're right. Usually we read about Paris a certain way. And when I stumbled across the story of these white immigrants who were fleeing Russia, they fled all over the world, anywhere just to get away from what was happening in Russia, because they were being killed because of who they were and their associations with the Tsar. And then many of them ended up in Paris, and they created their own little Russias, and they really didn't have anything more than the clothes on their back. So you get them, and they have to find shelter. So they're hiding in basements. They're doing they're selling their jewels just so they can have scraps of bread. So they're fleeing this horrible revolution, but at the same time, Paris is right on the brink of the war that was happening, the Great War. I mean, literally the German guns were firing within miles of Paris. So Paris was under attack. It was a city at war. You know, they had lights out at a certain time. They had curfews. They had all of these wounded flooding into the city, and people from the countryside coming in for shelter. So it was a very, very different Paris than what we think of, but a very resilient people still. Like, we're not going to succumb to the fear that the Germans are trying to place on us. So I really tried to dive into this other part of Paris that maybe we didn't see, maybe from the perspective of what the Russians were going through as they were fleeing. You know, they would end up in these church basements and have to live down there when they were used to living in palaces. And they would form these little groups and what became known as Little Neva in this neighborhood in Paris, and Russian churches sprang up. And, you know, that's not something that I ever knew about Paris. So I liked being able to bring that part of history to life that we don't know about, you know, and then bring in this nightclub and this seedy underbelly. And I think anytime you have an influx of people, there's a scramble for power. So of course you're going to have some unsavory characters try to grab all the power that they can, and not good circumstances usually come from that. But it makes for a great plot.
Yes. Well, yeah, I love that where it sort of opens up into, you know, there's complete deprivation and desperation. And then all of a sudden you go through a door and it's, you know, glitz and glam and over the top and caviar and everything else.
Yes.
So like you said, even in wartime, even when things are the most clamped down, there will be people who will figure out the black market, and they'll figure out how to use scarcity to their advantage. And so you have some bad guys in here who are doing exactly that. And some good guys who are helping. So was was it sort of Svetlana's character and story that came to you first with the Russians fleeing, or was it the surgeon because of all of this influx of, I'm sort of curious about whether one character came before the other or whether they just sort of came to you at the same time fitting together?
So she came to me first. I was watching a Russian miniseries called Road to Calvary, and it was about these two aristocratic Russian sisters. And the Great War was going on, and then all of a sudden the Russian Revolution exploded, and Russia had to pull out of the Great War to deal with their own civil war at home. And it shows these two sisters and the choices that they make, the situations that they're forced into because they're part of the nobility. They're no longer on top. So you watch them fall and all of the hardships that they now have to go through just to survive. And I thought, that's really interesting. I've never thought about what would happen. Like, we all know the story of the Tsar and Anastasia and stuff, and then the Reds coming into power, but we'd never really thought, at least I didn't think much about, well, what happened to the people who were there? What happened to the aristocrats? And that's what happened to them. They had to go into hiding or they had to flee. So I really wanted to explore that idea of what happened to these, like a princess, or a noblewoman. What would happen to her? What would she do? So she came to me first, and then she had this very, very distinct personality. She's very difficult. She's not that easy to love until you get to know her. And I wanted her to be like that when she first came to me. I wanted her to be difficult. I wanted you to work to have to get to know her. And once you do, I hope that you appreciate her and her struggles all the more. And I thought, well, how can I balance out this very strong but very cold woman? Well, I need a guy who's going to be, humorous and easygoing. And okay, well, what is he going to be doing? Well, I've done soldiers, and I don't want to do, like a pilot. I don't want to. So what can I do? Well, he needs to be in Paris. Well, there's a lot of hospitals and incoming wounded. Well, I guess I'll make him a doctor. So he just kind of became a doctor. And I never wanted to write a doctor before. They intimidate me because there's so much medical knowledge, and it's kind of nerve-wracking to get yourself into that. But then I discovered that cardiology was not a thing at the time, and it became a thing because of the Great War, and there was a lot of controversy about it. And I thought that would be really interesting. So he became a surgeon. So he just kind of fell into place. He wasn't so easy to pin down, but I think he became a good partner for her to help balance her out.
And he's from Scotland, so you get
he's
that.
from Scotland because I had to, I had to.
Great. I was just wanted to mention, I'm seeing some questions pop up in the comments. Definitely ask all the questions you want. We will get to them. We have a few things we want to do in our conversation, but then I'll start bringing in the comments. So ask away. We want to know what you want to know. And we'll sort of start feeding those into the overall discussion. So so on the topic of Scotland, you already had a book coming out this year. That one was set in Scotland. This one is very different, although without giving too much away, there's some Scotland here too. Was the research process very different, writing about those two environments, or is your process kind of the same regardless of where you're writing about and when you're writing about?
I'm fortunate in that I kind of stick to the same time periods and kind of the same locations. So now that I've had a couple of stories set in these places and during this time, I kind of have a foundation of knowledge. So I'm comfortable writing in them, and that's probably why I choose them. Plus, I just enjoy writing about them. So in one regard, yes, my research is kind of the same because I kind of know. But for each story, of course, you have to learn new things because you need to bring a new perspective to the different story and what the characters are experiencing. So for this one, I had to learn what was Paris like during the Great War. If you were a citizen, what was going on? I had to learn about curfews and the geography and what it was like to be in a hospital, because they turned many of the hotels into hospitals. They didn't have enough medical places to send their wounded, so they were just taking whatever buildings they could. So I had to learn about that. And then when they leave Paris, I had to learn not so much a new environment because I knew Scotland, but I didn't want it to be a crumbling old castle like in my last book. I needed a more established castle with a community. So I had to learn what it was like to live in a community at that time and what the concerns were of the tenants living, because their menfolk were coming back from war. So what were their concerns? What were they dealing with day to day? And what kind of problems were they bringing to their lord and master, basically? So a little bit of old stuff, a little bit of new stuff, but it's always good to learn new things, I think.
Yes. And you've got the emotional stuff in there. You've got to, like you said, figure out what the people were doing at the time, but then sort of the hard and fast, like when they're when they're leaving Paris to go to another location, like how hard is it to do that? How hard is it to get a ticket on a ship? How hard is, what's happening with evacuations and a lot of other things? Because as historical writers, we get emails when we get something wrong, or if somebody thinks that we got something wrong, which happens more frequently.
Yes.
So we do get, some outreach from readers.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people this is fiction, and I do my very best to do the best research that I can. And I'm human, so sometimes I will make mistakes, but there are some things where I change it on purpose because it fits the plot, and it's fiction.
Yeah.
So
do you ever add to your author's note a little, something that says, well, I changed this for this reason, or do you have just the blanket, look, it's historical fiction. If it were nonfiction, we would have said so.
Yeah, I do a bit of both. I mean, if it's something really obvious, then I'll make a note about it. Like, okay, I did this on purpose. I know it's not correct. There's a reason I did it, and here's why. So I do try to bring that up, so that way people aren't like, she's crazy and doesn't know what she's talking about.
He doesn't know a thing.
I know. Yeah.
Been there. Yeah. And I'll wrap more questions in later, but we're talking a lot about research, and there's a question sitting here about research. So I have to just move smoothly into that because OPHS Library has given me that opportunity. And it is a library asking this question. They want to know, where do you do most of your research?
Well, I wish I could travel to actually go to these locations and do most of the research. Unfortunately, I can't. So Google is my best friend. So I use a lot of online resources. I started Wikipedia for like the bird's eye view, but never take that as the gospel. So you just start there like, okay, well, what's even happening? What's going on? So I start there, and then you start moving into the more specific, factual based documents and firsthand accounts. And then I have a whole shelf over here full of nonfiction research type books that I will use to learn about what's happening at the time period and the cultural, social, political atmosphere of the time, whatever it is that I need to know. And then I will move into more specific things like, okay, I've got an idea of what's happening in the world and what's happening, on the stage at the moment, but how is that going to impact my characters? My character is a princess and a surgeon. Okay. How does all this stuff impact them, and what kind of decisions are they making? So I try to read as much as possible, all kinds of stuff, fiction and nonfiction, because when you read fiction, it helps to kind of give you a feel for the world in the time period. And you can be like, oh, okay, so that's how that author does that. Okay, well, that's a good idea. And then you obviously take the nonfiction to work in your facts. So I think both are important to have the feel of the time period plus the facts. And I also listen to music from the time period, and movies are my biggest resource. I'm a very visual learner. So if I can watch a movie or a TV series or a documentary or something, that's where a lot of my inspiration and plot points and oh that's cool, I can grab that and I'll put that in there. So yeah, TV for me, but I try to get it all different places, so I'm hopefully well-rounded.
I feel like TV and movies are so good for sort of the vibe and the visuals, because we have a choice as writers. Like, we can describe what everybody is wearing, and I think that every reader of historical fiction and historical romance wants to know some of that. But I'm not going to walk into every single scene telling you what every single person is wearing. But
Right.
in the movie, you do have to know what every person is wearing, because they're all depicted and somebody had to dress them all. So just having sort of that, if it's done in the time period. And like you said, with Wikipedia, it's a starting point. You say, okay, well, I'm seeing the vibe here. I'm seeing, the styles here. Now I'm going to go and research and make sure that that's all accurate, because people do make mistakes.
Yes.
Or make choices that they're going to do something different from that. But yeah, I like that. And I feel like you've probably been told this. I've been told this. I've been told I write cinematically. And I think that's just people saying, oh, I can picture it. And that's what you want. You want to sort of sweep the reader away.
Exactly. Like it's a movie in my head.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
I mean, that's how I see it when I write. It's literally like a movie in my head, so I can see the scene happening. So if a reader comes back and says, oh, it's like I was watching a movie, it makes me feel so good because I did something right. You were able to see what I was trying to convey.
Good. And you mentioned sort of having to get technical about the surgeon and cardiology and have sort of the terms in there. Did you feel the same way about the ballet terms, or were you already familiar with ballet? Because that's pretty technical also and very specific.
I know nothing about ballet. I like to watch it. I know nothing about it. So yes, I had to watch videos on ballet and learn different moves. And here's the funny thing. I actually had someone contact me because they got a NetGalley, and it was a ballerina. And she's like, I just want you to know, I love the story, but you made a couple you called a couple of the movements and they were wrong. So here's what you should have said. She was very nice about it and very helpful. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed, but thank you so much for telling me. I really appreciate it. So when you first read it, some of the moves might be incorrect, but they will be corrected on the second one because my editor jumped on it. But yeah, so see, I made mistakes. I mean, I did my research and I put in what I thought was the correct move. And then a professional came in and said, that's not exactly what that means. Like, I understood what you were talking about, but that's not the actual term. So I do appreciate it when people reach out to me in a nice way to help me, because now I'm learning,
Well, and especially at the ARC stage or the galley stage, you can still do something about it, as opposed to finished book, totally done, been on the shelf for 6 months. And now people are like, oh no, by the way, Derringers didn't exist yet. Which is something I got contacted about, but it turned out Derringers did exist. So I was really happy about that. But yeah, we're never going to know everything that a professional knows, because we're professional writers. That's what we're good at and focused on, but we're magpies, right? We're learning and gleaning and throwing in bits and pieces.
Yes.
But I always find finding exactly that right level of detail is a challenge on every manuscript. Too much and it bogs it down, and not enough. And people say, oh, I didn't feel like I was there. I didn't get swept away, and I really want to sweep people away.
Yeah.
Do you have that challenge also, finding like the right level of detail?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. And you're right, because as historical writers, we want to throw in all the trivia that we gleaned over the past couple, like, no, you need to know all of this that I filled up my notebook with, but really you probably don't. So we have to be very careful what we include. And luckily editors are there to rein us back in. On my work in progress, I went into this like 2 paragraphs worth of where mascara came from. And she was like, this is fascinating, but you need to take it out. Sorry. So, it happens. But I've found that if I give so for example, the hero is a surgeon. So when you first meet him, I go into a lot more technical detail of the surgery that he's performing. So that way you can be like, oh, okay, I got it. I'm in his world now. I see what he's doing. And then as the story goes along, I don't explain it as much. I pull back on those details because I already gave them to you. You don't need a medical lesson every other chapter. Exactly. So I try to balance it that way.
That makes sense. I like that idea. Like his entrance is you're framing him, you're anchoring the reader, and then you can sort of go from there because they'll already know. Oh yeah,
exactly. Like, okay, he knows what he's doing. Okay, we can we can use our imagination later on in the chapters. We don't need everything described. I find that works.
I do sometimes. I would also love to know where mascara comes from, but I have the problem. I need someone to tell me if it's too much detail or not. When I was writing The Magician's Lie, I had a scene set at Biltmore and the first Christmas, and the main character, the narrator, is one of the servants who's like taking dishes up and down the big stairs and taking, the big Christmas meal. And here are we having succotash? Are we having caviar? Are we having like all this? So the scene was like a page long, and my agent was like, oh my gosh, we need to know so much more about this. So then the scene was like 6 pages long. And then she's like, no, that's too much.
You went too far.
Somewhere in between. So like 2-3 page scene, we found the right level, but I can go on, and like,
yes,
we can go on.
We can, and we will, but our editors won't let us.
Yes, which is why it's good to have editors.
Yes.
So is your next book with the same publisher, or is that one not under contract yet? If you can talk about your work in progress, but since you mentioned the work in progress, I feel like we can open that door.
Yes, it is with my same publisher, with Thomas Nelson, and it's coming out in the spring. I just finished the first round of edits, and I haven't announced the title of it yet or the cover, but I will soon. I wanted to focus all my attention on ICE SWAN before I started moving into this other one. But the idea for it, I was watching a lot of Marvel movies last summer, particularly the Captain America ones, and I thought, what would happen if the Winter Soldier fell in love?
Ooh.
So that's the story that I'm writing. And it's a duology, and it's set during the Great War. And it involves secret spy agencies, occults, the founding fathers, Russia, Dracula, mythology, assassin. Like it's a little different than what I normally write.
A lot.
It's still historical, and it's still, I think, will have the same feel that I normally write with, but it's a little more action and adventure. So it's like Indiana Jones meets the Avengers.
Love it. Yeah, when I did the Arctic Fury, I was sort of like, I want to do an action adventure book. Like, I want these women to be out there doing stuff. And it's not like your last couple of books have been lacking for action. There's chases and escapes and romance and voyages and murder plots and whatnot. But yeah, I love that term for you. So is that going to be the first time that you've written anything that's sort of series?
Yes. Usually I write standalones, because once I'm done with the story, I'm done. I'm ready to move on to something else. When I first pitched this idea to my editor, I pitched it as a trilogy, because the Captain America is a trilogy. And I thought, I'll just kind of, follow that formula. And she said, no.
Too much.
Get it down into 2. So I squished it down into 2 books instead. So I'm working on the second half right now. I'm halfway through.
Okay.
Writing that one. So I'm excited about it. It's a little different. Sometimes I think you just need to change things up, when a new idea comes to you. And because I know you're working on something that's a little different right now.
Yes, very different. So yeah, I was asking about series because I am in the midst of the series experience for the first time. And actually, so book 1 is coming out in next spring. I think it's coming out on 2/22/22, which I'm super excited about because that feels very auspicious.
Yes.
So book 1 of my epic fantasy series is coming out then. So I'm working on book 2 now, but I have to stop and step away. I don't know if you have this also. Like, I've been working on book 2 for over a year now, and I need to push away from it and then come back to it with fresh eyes. So today I actually outlined book 3, which was kind of nuts. Because I'm going to have these sort of annual deadlines for a while. But yes, so I also have not announced the the cover and the title. I've got a cover reveal coming probably later in the week, but it's epic fantasy, and we pitched it as a feminist Game of Thrones. So it's this big, sprawling epic fantasy with women. All the main characters are women, and it's set in a matriarchal world where the women are in charge. So it's very different from my past writing in some ways, but in other ways, you sort of see in the 4 books that I've written so far, the seeds of this sort of women's stories. And I thought it would just be interesting to write, because especially with historical, we're talking about a world where women don't have the same rights, where they're fighting against patriarchy and preconceived notions of what they can and can't do. And the farther back you go in historical, with a few exceptions, the more constrained their lives are. Like, maybe if I just didn't write about that at all, maybe I just have this fantasy world where they're already in charge and they don't have to worry about it, people kind of trying to keep them down. What do those plot lines look like? Still strife and war and danger and all sorts of stuff, but it's different. And I'm sort of free of the constraints of history. So
do you feel your creativity has kind of come alive in a different way, writing a new type of story?
Yeah, it's different. It's not that I was tired of historical fiction, and I'll also be writing historical fiction coming up after I figure out how to fit that in with all of the other stuff. But yeah, the words flow more freely for me now that I've made a switch. Have you found the same with your change?
Yes, although I wrote the first book last summer, so right in the middle of the pandemic. So it wasn't quite the experience I was hoping for. In other words, I had no creativity. So it was very difficult. But now that I'm working on the second book, it's coming a lot easier. And I do find it's kind of freeing, to be able to write something a little bit different. And I think that opens up a new wave of creativity, and you're able to think outside the box of what you normally have to think inside of. So I think that's great. And I think it can make for stronger writing, because you're not so narrowly focused on what you normally have to write by. You can come up with a new world, new perspectives that aren't constrained to the strict restrictions of society at the time. So yeah, I'm excited for this story, and I'm excited for yours. I know I'm really getting into fantasy lately, so I'm like, oh, a new one, it'll be good.
Oh, there's so much good fantasy, just every day at every Tuesday. Like, oh my gosh, I want to read that. I want to read that one. That's
I know.
So good. Yeah, I was, I think probably even last time we talked, pandemic writing, I was lackadaisical about oh yeah, last summer, which is now 2 summers ago now. Yeah. So talking about last summer, total lockdown, pandemic intensity, I was always saying, oh yeah, I was able to write during the pandemic because I could write first draft trash. I have to write a bad first draft before I get to fix it. And it felt fine. Because I'm like, oh yeah, it's just words. I'm making 140,000 words, whatever. I'll fix them later. And now later has arrived. And I'm still fixing them. So it feels a little bit more daunting.
I noticed that with mine too, that I try to have a very clean first draft because I'm kind of a perfectionist in that way. But I was also trying to give myself a bit of grace because it was during a pandemic. And then I was looking at the edits, and I thought, oh, this is a lot more work than I'm. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't up to the standard that I know I can be at, and that's frustrating. But
that's why we do multiple drafts.
That's right. That's right. Those editors coming in handy again.
Yes. And nobody I know has ever published a first draft of anything. So it's, we redo it, then we get our editors involved. Sometimes our agents are involved, some beta readers, critique groups,
Multiple
steps. Go ahead.
Multiple steps.
Yes. And writers have this image of being sort of the lonely poet scribbling in the garret kind of thing, that I don't know anyone who writes alone for the entire process. Maybe do a first draft alone, maybe even do like the first couple of drafts alone, but just about everybody I know at some point has to turn to someone else and say, how can I make this better? Or how could I potentially make it? What do you think I should do? And you don't have to take the feedback. You can say, nope, you think I should, make the Winter Soldier like the Hulk or whatever. And
Right.
you can say, no, I don't think. I think, Hulk is a different book. This book is something else.
Exactly. Yeah, because you get like the blinders on to your story, and then somebody else can come along and say, you know what, if you did this, and you think, oh, that's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? And then sometimes they'll have suggestions that you don't agree with. And then you have to decide, well, is it really a good suggestion, or is it worth me, pushing back on?
Mm-hmm.
So, but most of the time, I think I've always agreed with my editor. There's been a couple of things I thought, no, I don't agree with that. I did this for a reason. But yeah, invaluable help.
Yes. And what I find when I'm working with other writers as my readers is sometimes they're giving you the feedback, like they're telling you how they would have written it or the book that they want to read, but you may or may not be writing the book that they want to read. You need to write the book you want to read and what you want to make it. So always a dance.
Yeah, it is.
Well, we've got some great questions, so I will start asking more questions. And those of you, again, on YouTube or Facebook, pop right in there, ask whatever questions you want. We got one from Marissa, and I don't know if you'll have an answer to this, ready, so we'll see. She's asking, what were you most surprised to learn while you were researching the history for this story? Was there anything that jumps out at you as surprising?
I think it was cardiology. I never realized that it was such a scandal when they started doing it. I mean, throughout the centuries, doctors, physicians have been practicing on all parts of the body, and many times in secret. But it wasn't until the Great War that it became not acceptable, but it became an issue that they needed to confront, to start opening up the heart, because they had all of these wounded soldiers and they needed help, and they were just being left to die because physicians were like, oh, not touching that. And thank goodness there was one who decided, no, I can do this. I can save my patient. And so he had the guts to cut open his patient and get that bullet out of where it was lodged against his heart. And, his colleagues were like, no, he became an outcast. And so anybody who wanted to do these forward thinking methods, they were ostracized. The powers that be thought that what we've been doing all along is good enough. So thank goodness we have some people who want to push those boundaries and say, no, we can do better. We can have better advancements, and we can extend the life of our patients. And unfortunately, it took war to bring that about, but war brings a lot of change in technology and society, and a lot of it's good stuff. We've had a lot of great necessities come out of war. I mean, it's terrible that it has to come from fighting, but and now when you have heart surgery, it's no big deal, right? I mean, people have it all the time and we don't think anything of it, but back in the day, it was scandal. It was very scandalous. So I was really surprised at that. And I tried to showcase that in the story with Wynn in his journey, as he's trying to bring about this medical practice, and he is being ostracized by his own colleagues, and a little bit to his detriment at times. But I wanted to showcase the struggles that physicians were dealing with at the time. So that was probably my
we don't always think about, everything had to be invented at some point along the way, right? And it's easy to sort of look back in hindsight and say, that was the right decision. Of course, you can save somebody by going into the heart, and, they're not all going to survive, but more of them will survive from having been given the chance. And I find a lot of that also is the roles of women changing during wartime, that women are asked to do things that if there were men around to do them, the men would have been doing them. But people say, okay, well, we need somebody to make the parts, and
That's right.
to make them, so the women can make them. So it is such a time of change.
It really is.
Generally, so. Another question, one comment and then one question from the OPHS library again. The comment is, let us know if you ever need someone to go with you to Paris or Scotland for research. Definitely makes sense.
Right.
The line forms behind me.
Right.
Yeah, I want to go. I've never been to Scotland. It just sounds so beautiful.
It's my favorite place in the whole world. Like, I think everyone has a heart place in the world that when they visit there, it just feels like you belong there. And for me, that's Scotland. And I love it. We're supposed to go next year. So I'm hoping that we are able to go, because we haven't been there in 10 years.
Oh, wow.
I know. So I'm really hoping, and maybe a story will come out of it. But yeah, I just can't wait to go back. It's beautiful. So you need to go. Especially because your name is Scottish.
Right, yes. So I got to get there.
I know.
And then there's a question which you may or may not have thought about for this particular book, but I'll ask it because I feel like people are always interested. And you did mention TV and movies earlier. Who are the people that would play the main roles in your movie? Have you thought about casting Wynn and Svetlana and the others?
Yes, but they're not actors. If you go to my Pinterest page, I have a little page that's dedicated to the ICE SWAN. So you'll see the two people, no, I don't have, that I chose. So I think they're models. But I will say that I modeled Wynn on Chris Pratt from the Jurassic Park movies. So that kind of like easygoing, yet a little arrogant, but funny. So I kind of, I modeled him after him. And in the movie, he's paired with a very like icy and like kind of strict woman. So that was part of my inspiration for their relationship.
Do you early on in your process sort of put together your Pinterest board and have your images that you're going back to while you're writing?
Yes. I love Pinterest. I get on the rabbit hole sometimes when I'm supposed to be writing, and that looks fun. I'll just add that. But yes, I like to know what the people look like and the places that they're visiting, so I can go and I can look at the images again, and then I can just describe what I'm seeing on the image. That helps me a lot. So I love Pinterest.
Good. And if anybody wants to go to J'nell's Pinterest page, one more page has put the link right there in the chat. That's awesome. I find faces are really helpful because there are only so many times that you can say sort of, okay, well, he pointed his sharp nose in one direction. Like, I need some sort of reference for the overall thing. And going back and describing people, one of my many shortcomings early in my writing career was just describing people by their hair color. And I'm like, oh, the blonde woman did this and the brunette did that. And that was like it. Those were the decisions I made about aesthetics. So when I was writing The Magician's Lie, it was really helpful for me to have pictures of people.
Right, because you can say, oh, I need to describe something other than their hair. And having a face there helps you remember that there's other parts to the face that you can talk about.
Yes, eye color and hair color both. I'm like, okay, it's good to get the green eyes in there, but then let's go a little wider here, and we can talk about shoulders. And
I'm guilty about the eyes, always describing them.
You gotta know that too, especially in romance. I feel like there's a eye connection thing. You gotta
right there, windows to the soul.
Yes, very much so. We've got a good question here from Marissa. Do you separate your time to research from your time to write to keep a good flow, or do you do both at the same time?
So before I ever start writing, I research, and then once I feel comfortable enough in the time period and the topic that I'm going to be covering, then I will start writing. And usually as I'm writing, I will continue to do a lighter research just so I can stay familiar, or especially if I need to look something up real fast. But the bulk of my research comes before I start writing, because I'm a planner, I'm a plotter, and I like to know what's going to happen before I even sit down to start writing. So the more information I have, the better prepared I feel for the story.
I have to separate it. I have to do sort of a big search up front, like a bunch of research up front, but then I have to stop researching in order to write. So when I wrote The Magician's Lie, which is my first historical novel, it took me 5 years because I hadn't learned to separate the two yet. And so I would be writing and like, oh, la, 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 la. This person needs to put on a hat. And then I would stop writing and I would go research hats. And like 3 hours later, I would know everything there was to know about hats in this particular era. And I would have the right hat, but I wouldn't have written anything else for 3 hours. And that's why it took me 5 years to get there. And
it's
so
funny how everybody has such a different approach to research and writing, and you just figure out what works for you along the way.
Right. And it can change over time too.
Yeah. Did you include all the information you learned about the hat?
No, not at all. And then I think that scene ended up getting cut completely. So then I learned you put in like the big picture, like I want to know how long it takes to walk from Washington to Baltimore or whatever. But I don't need to know, like when I was writing Girl in Disguise, I wrote like a chase scene through the streets of Chicago. And then I made sure that that scene was actually going to be like 3 drafts down the road after my agent had read it and my editor had read it. Once I knew that that scene was actually going to be in there, then I pulled an 1850s map of Chicago and named the streets and said, okay, well, she's running down Walker and then she turns left and then she's on Adams, because I knew that I had that right, but it didn't have to be right in the early drafts. It just had to be right in time for the copy editor to check it for me.
Right.
And thank heaven for copy editors, because I need that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but then it changed because I had my process all set. And then the Arctic Fury took so much research. I was still researching while I was writing. I couldn't do it any other way and still make my deadline. So I had to do that.
Yeah, different stories require different approaches, I think. I think I've kind of had to adapt a little bit for each story. Like my process is still evolving, I think, depending on the demands of the story.
And now you've got this different genre that you're doing. And
I know. It all goes out the window.
It's different for that.
Exactly.
And the duology. So
I know, and all that watching of the Captain America movies. I mean, it's been really tough. It's been tough.
Oh, so much work. Yeah.
I know.
Awesome. We got a great question here from Aretha Lawler. With plotting, do you find, because you mentioned being a plotter and like having to have everything organized up front, do you find that the ending can change from your intention by the time you finish writing it?
Not usually. Usually I know where I'm going. I have the major plot points down when I start writing, and that includes the beginning and the ending. Now, what happens to get from plot or point A to point B, that can change. So I do give myself a little bit of leeway, but for the most part, I have the major things plotted out, and the ending, I usually know where I'm going to end up. Now, the interesting thing for my Winter Soldier book coming out, I had an ending and I ended up having to change it. And well, my editor was like, this is great, but you're not going to be able to do that. And I pushed back on it because I didn't like what they were telling me. And they're like, no, you're going to have to change it. So I ended up changing. I kept the spirit of what I had originally written, but I had to change it. And I understood why they wanted me to do it, and it will make for a better story. So yes, sometimes you do have to change your ending for the better, but for the most part, I think I've been able to keep most of my endings, and I knew what they were.
That's the first time you've had to diverge from your vision in that way. As opposed to the middle, like my middles always change. I'm like, I know where it's starting, I know where it's ending, but there are a lot of twists and turns along the way, and I'm going to have to change some of those twists and turns. And I don't realize it until it's written. And I'm like, oh, wait, connect, or that takes too long, or,
Yeah, I think it just depends on the book, right? Some stories you got it right away. And then some stories, it's just you're pulling out your hair. Why is this not working? And you have to change everything. So it just depends on the book. I'm blaming COVID. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to blame COVID for all the issues.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Is your Winter Soldier book like all one point of view, or are you bringing in different people? Because most of your other stuff, you've got the 2 points of view, right, when you're doing romance.
Yes, this one it'll still be the heroine and hero's point of views, and then towards the end, I throw in kind of a surprise point of view that helps jump into the next part of the series. So, but for the most part, I like to stick to 2. That way I can get really deep into them. So I'd like to write a villain at some point. I think that would be really cool.
It's fun. If you do like a thriller or something, I feel like that's the most common, where the villain is sort of doing their like plotting.
Yes.
I've got, my next project has like, I don't know, like 10 POVs or something like that. And so I get to write the bad women, bad women. But and then maybe they're not, maybe they're good, maybe they're bad, maybe they do good things for bad reasons or bad things for good reasons. And like I love that complexity. I
like that.
Getting dug in there. So that's a lot of fun. But I did do 13 points of view for Arctic Fury, which was just such a ridiculous thing to do. But those are all 1 chapter each. So Virginia narrates most of it, but then there's a little bit from each of the other.
Yeah. Well, you pulled it off really well.
Thank you.
And it added to the suspense of what was going on. And
yes, it was that turned out to not be the hard part. I thought that was going to be the hard part, but
it wasn't.
Getting the darn thing written was the hard part. But I feel like Ice Swan and Arctic Fury are a good pairing. You know, if it's hot out and you want to read something that will help cool you on, you can use those. Yeah.
Christmas in July.
Yes. And I think there are going to be signed copies, and Amber can tell us now that she's back. There are going to be signed copies of the Ice Swan at One More Page if people want to order.
Yes, J'nell's actually going to stop by tomorrow, so there's still time if you want a personalized signed copy. You can order that tonight. I did a quick look online. I saw at least 1 order come in. So the link is there in the comments. So there's still time to do that. But thank you both so much. This was great. I want to like read and travel and kind of curl up with it. It's so hot today. So the cold setting actually sounds pretty good at the moment. So, but thank you. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And you should be able to find everything that you need at those links. Greer, we'll see you again next week. Yeah. And J'nell, I'll see you tomorrow at the store.
Tomorrow, yes, I'll be there.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.